Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. If you've got questions, of course, you can throw those into Makana. You can ask those questions, vote on the questions, talk with other people about the questions. If you're not there, of course, you can, any time of the day, it's 24/7, you can go to askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global, and you can ask your question there, and we'll get it in either this show or the next show or one of the shows very soon. And you also have to keep on listening to the records. so anyway, but go ahead and ask officehours.global. Throw your questions in there. Today is audio day, and we have some great audio experts. So if you have audio questions, this is the day to ask them. So make sure to throw those audio questions in. Start thinking about questions that you have about audio. I'm going to wager that we can answer most of them. So throw those questions in, and let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Douglas Carmichael starts us off this morning with something that goes like this. Franklin Audio makes the SS6 Synth Switcher DI, basically a 6-in, 1-out stereo DI. Can anyone recommend an affordable 8-channel DI box of similar quality? And he's got a link to the Franklin there.
Good, Courtney.
Well, I can't, but I tell you, this Franklin one is after my own heart. It looks like I built this out of stuff I found in my junk box because it's a bud box, aluminum box with a rotary switch and a bunch of, look, there's a big old Switchcraft mechanical toggle down there to lift the ground. It's all made with parts from the 60s, and this has a rotary mechanical switch. So there's probably something a lot better for an 8-channel DI box, but I don't know one. This is just a mechanical switch and a bunch of jacks.
It looks beautiful. Go ahead, Jeff.
So if you want something sort of affordable, a little more than this, probably the Whirlwind is a great company that makes passive DI. So there's the Whirlwind 8-channel passive direct box. But if you actually want a great sounding DI, Whirlwind is a great sounding DI. But if you want to go up a little more, if I can find the picture of it, it doesn't disappear. Come on back. So, Radial. Radial makes a great direct box. They have an 8-channel version. There we go. Here's a lovely picture of it. But you're talking, 3 times as much money as the affordable solution that Douglas is looking at. But you can't go wrong with a Radial DI. But getting 8 channels all together in a box, probably not going to be something that's in the affordable scale because it's a little more of a niche market. So putting together several DIs maybe gets you that for less money than the $600 or $1,000 we're talking about.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, for me, I wouldn't necessarily base the DI that I use on simply on the ability for it to switch between inputs. I'd rather have a separate switcher that feeds a DI that I prefer. The sound or the tone of different DIs have different, can affect the signal differently and add coloration to it. +1 on radial engineering. I'm a big fan of radial. If you think about it, I have radial engineering boxes that are about 20 years old and they still work well. So in the long term, they're not really that expensive if you break it down on the cost per year. Alternatively, if this is a recording studio environment, I'd probably also recommend going with a 1/4-inch patch bay that you can plug and unplug your different instruments in and out individually. This one is a popular one by Neutrik. It can be set up for normal, half normal, high Alex. It can also be set up for a split mode. It's a very configurable patch panel or patch bay that you just simply configure by switching around the modules that are inside the patch bay itself.
And for our listeners, what's the difference between active and passive direct box?
With active direct boxes, there's active circuitry in it, usually a transformer that provides isolation and technically, in the technical sense, isolation, but also may provide some color to the sound as well.
I go, Jeff.
So active, as Mickey said, has circuitry in it, so you can create a much higher input impedance and passive is based around a transformer. So that does impedance reflection of whatever mic preamp to which you connect this DI. So generally the good rule of thumb is if you have an active instrument, you can use a passive DI because the active instrument has already handled all the impedance problems because it has electronics in the instrument. And if you have a passive instrument, you connect it to an active DI because you need that really high input impedance. Also active, because it has circuitry, can distort. So you don't want to connect an active device that could potentially have a very high electrical output into an active DI because you could cause distortion in the electronics.
And what are examples of active and passive instruments?
Basically, if it needs a battery or if it connects to phantom power or you plug it into the wall, it's an active instrument. So keyboards are definitely an active instrument. Passive instruments would be passive basses, passive electric guitars. Those are generally the passive instruments. So most acoustic guitars, not all of them, but most acoustic guitars, you're going to have to put a 9-volt battery in them to get an instrument level output out of them because it's a piezoelectric pickup that has some electronics with it. Many basses are active basses. You have a 9-volt battery or some kind of power in there that has circuitry in the bass itself. And so those provide a nice, well-behaved output impedance. Passive instruments do not, and so they are going to want to use an active DI. So for this question, talking about connecting keyboards, everything we showed was a passive DI, and that's absolutely fine, and in fact preferred because it's much more difficult to distort a simple transformer-based DI than it is to distort one that has electronics in it.
Good, Courtney?
Yeah, and since he's talking about synths, I'm wondering why he wouldn't just choose a small mixer so that instead of just switching from one synth to another synth to another synth, that he doesn't have it into a mini mixer of some sort, so he can combine multiple synths in if he wants to, rather than an exclusive either or. The other problem dealing with passive synths switching is all synthesizers are pretty much powered either by batteries or by off the wall, and the chances of you getting a ground loop are greater if you have multiple unbalanced inputs all plugged into a single box that are sharing the same ground on that switch. So you would want them to have, like Jeff was saying, transformer isolation between your inputs and your outputs to try and eliminate some of that hum. If you get into multiple ground paths, that can be death, even though you're switched between, those are switched off. They may share the same ground.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, just to add to what Courtney mentioned, these are a couple. Radio engineering has a bunch of selections for switchers here, but they do have little stereo mixers designed for keyboards and synths that do include direct DI boxes inside. So this one's a small one, and here's a larger rack-mounted one.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So while we're on the topic of transformers and DIs and impedance and all those sorts of things, another place that we run into transformers is in analog mic splitters. So thankfully, we're moving to the age where we are putting preamps right at the source and we're splitting things digitally via a Dante network or something of that nature. But if you do have an analog mic splitter, most of those use a transformer so that the direct side, which is a pure copper wire path, connects from the microphone to one microphone preamp, and that one provides phantom power. The other outputs are isolated through a transformer, which is two coils of wires that do not touch electronically. They convert electricity to magnetism and back to electricity. Phantom power cannot pass through that. The important thing is most of those are designed only for mic level. So they will actually distort if you run things into the high range of line level audio. So coming from a stage with analog mic splitters back to a console, it may seem counterintuitive at first to take your line level sources, say from someone's playback system on stage that has an an audio interface with line level outputs. You're going to take those line level outputs and you're going to drop them through a DI into mic level so that they can go through the transformer isolated mic splitter and then be amplified at the audio consoles and the broadcast console and the monitor console. Because if you don't, when they get to really high, the top 10 dB of their range, they will actually distort the transformers in the mic splitter. And that's not a bad design. That's just the way they were designed, is only to split mic level signals.
Next question.
We're moving to Chad in Toledo, who says, I've been allocated $50,000 US for a company studio. It's a 21-foot by 21-foot room, all hands meetings, internal trainings, and so forth. I will need to occasionally access it remotely. How would you allocate the funds? And he notes he recently found us on YouTube. Amazing. Thank you.
Go, Jeffrey.
Well, first of all, welcome, Chad, to the show. I'm glad you're here. So 21 by 21 room, that's a pretty decent room. I don't know what the height on that room is. That could be definitely a factor there. And it also depends on how you are actually going to be doing stuff in the room. Is there going to be a big table in the middle of the room? Are you going to have tables outlining kind of in a square pattern from there for those? And do you want something that when you're doing training presentations, you want to make it look good, have the company logo, things like that? So the first thing always is having take a look at the room, see what type of soundproofing you can get in there. The better is always the term for that, because you're probably going to be placing microphones not on the person but in the room, overhead microphones that can be moved around, especially if you're going from a round table to a straight to a wall. Being able to remotely access it, it's always nice to have the equipment in a adjoining room so you can get to it without interrupting any type of meeting or presentation and fix a problem. And then, of course, any noise gets isolated in there, and then you can remotely access it from there. So the other thing is that I would highly suggest looking at doing patches in walls for microphone cables, any type of connection, audio, visual, and sometimes it's nice to actually have one in the center of the room that you can easily access. Or if you have like a big table in the middle, you can always get one of those little devices that will run a cable into the table, and then you have all the patches right in the middle from there. So those are some suggestions, but I think getting somebody local in there to really take a look at the room would probably be your best bet.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm going to support that last thought. This is kind of complicated. First of all, you've got a square room, and that's always a little bit problematic for sound because standing waves tend to build up in rooms unless they're treated. So I would think about sound first in your planning. I would also think about electrical load because you're going to have a lot of things in there, and getting ground loops out of circuits is something that takes really somebody to pay some attention to. When I was building out my hay barn studio, I spent a lot of time on those two things in the beginning, and thankfully it really worked out really well so I could do things like be in progress when there were people walking outside or whether there was traffic noise or something. I had taken all that stuff into consideration and built it in such a way that I could turn it on and just work no matter what time it was, and on my schedule rather than the environment's schedule. The other thing I would look at is trying to make it as flexible as possible in terms of configuration and reconfiguration. For me, that meant a lot of external wiring that I could go in and reconfigure if I needed to run another line over to some part of the studio. I had a lot of conduit in there that allowed that to happen easily rather than fixed infrastructure that could only work the way it was originally designed. And those are just a couple of things I found really useful. So pay attention to sound early, and pay attention to power early, and HVAC. Quiet HVAC so that the studio can be in operation and keep people comfortable at the same time. Those would be my big watch out fors.
Here you go, Jeff.
Yeah, so definitely worrying about sound first because it's really important. Probably some good broad light sources Alex has got a great technique of using a light source behind a diffusion. So if you can get those or build those to get very large light sources to just kind of flood the space where people are going to be with broad light, that will help any camera that you need. You talk about accessing it remotely, but only occasionally. A technique that I've found that works pretty well is to have a dedicated network in the room and dedicated computer on that network that you can remote into. So I'll keep my production systems off the internet because I'm not doing remote work most of the time, but one computer is attached to the internet with 2 network interface connections. And I can log into that computer and remotely control things via that, and even set up a companion satellite. So Companion, if you can get into Companion and Stream Deck, that will give you a lot of ability to take the functionality of many devices and bring them to one controller that even a non-technical person can probably run basic meetings. So that's a great idea to allocate it. I would think about those kind of control systems as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, it's difficult to give figures in terms of how to allocate the budget because this would vary greatly between different requirements of the different types of programming that you need to produce within the space. With regards to remote access and remote control, though, VPN is invaluable. Services such as Parsec, TerraDC, Splashtop, even Nice are very useful as well.
Yeah, one of the things to look at is that pretty much everything when we build a lot of our studios, I've built a couple studios that are similar to yours, and then also built a bunch of remote kits. We try to make sure that everything is available via IP. So, for us, again, there's a lot of great things that you can do. At $50,000, you're going to get stretched pretty thin pretty quickly. So the first thing you want to do is make sure to treat those walls. So pick some walls that you're going to use for background, and then pick the other walls that you're going to use for absorption. It can be as cheap as you can obviously put up some. You're not trying to float the room. You're not trying to insulate it. You're just trying to keep it from reflecting. If it's truly a 20 by 21 square, you're going to have trouble with your audio, and so you're going to want to suck up a lot of that audio. You can even put, a lot of times curtains. If you go to Rose Brand, they make a lot of great curtains that are thick velour. You want to think about fullness. They'll ask you how much fullness. You want to be about 50 to 100% fullness, which means that there's 100% fullness is twice as much as you need to cover that space when you stretch it out. So those big loops back and forth will look okay, but they'll also suck up a lot of reflection. That's all you're trying to do is get rid of some of the reflection that's there. So that's something that a lot of people miss when they start building these studios is thinking about that audio. You'll go in, you'll see me every time I walk into a room that I'm going to shoot in, you'll hear me go, that's me trying to figure out what the audio, what's going to vibrate, like what's going to bounce around. Mixers, I would allocate about $2,000 for mixer. For these smaller studios, I have to admit that I'm still using X32s. These are kind of tried and true, and I can remote into it and take it over, or somebody can remote into it and take it over. You're going to need mics. I would allocate a couple $1,000s for your mics, probably for trainings and so on and so forth. You're looking at lav mics. Shure makes an MX, I think it's an MX series, that is in the kind of $150 a mic range, which is a pretty good range for microphones. Try to stay wired. You're not going to, at $50,000 for the total budget, you're not going to be able to afford to buy wireless that's going to work well. So think about, trying to stay wired for that. You might have one or two wireless transmitters, but just be really careful about using too much wireless. Allocate a couple $4,000 or $5,000 for lighting. If you have a drop ceiling, you can use scissor clips. So these are little scissor clips that will just hang to the drop ceiling. People will tell you to worry about it, but man, I put a lot of lights on a drop ceiling. Definitely look at making sure that it's got where the wires are coming down and know how much it can handle. But I've put a full lighting rig on almost every drop ceiling that I've ever started to put lights on and never had a problem, but these are well built. So feel around and make sure that you're not going to bend it. I would get probably a Blackmagic switcher. You could probably do your early stuff with an Extreme. I would stick with SDI for these things because you're going to want to route it. You can get a small router. Routers are super valuable, especially when you start having downstream you have confidence monitors, you have teleprompters, you have lots of things you want to get to. You can start with a 20 by 20 router. You'll end up with a 40 by 40 router, but given your budget, you may want to have something that you can reroute some of the signals that go out to things. Have something for playback and record. You're doing some trainings. You may want to record. We use HyperDecks. The mini HyperDecks, the little 3 per 1U are probably all you need to start with. A lot of us end up graduating to the full 1U versions of them, but you may not need that ahead of time. 20 by 20 is not a really large space for studios. And what I mean by that is that when you think about putting the table in there and you put all the gear in there, you're going to be 3 or 4 feet from the wall. So you're not going to have a ton of space back there unless you're doing I have a nearly 20 by 20 space in my office, and I'm using most of it up. And it would be cramped to bring in multiple people to talk. So think about using larger sensors. So that's going to make your whole studio, and this is something we found over and over again, it's going to make your whole studio feel bigger if you're using Super 35 or preferably full frame sensors. That's where I'd put a lot of money, is making sure that I've got great cameras. It's going to make the whole thing look way better than what you actually have in front of you at a 20 by 20 booth. Because after you add all the things I just said into it, it's going to feel pretty cramped. But I think that you, at that point, for instance, if I could stretch that budget, or if I could clamp it, or find a good deal, we really like PTZs because it reduces the number of people in the room. And this gets back to the HVAC issue, is we want to reduce the number of people in the room. So oftentimes, the cameras that we're using for almost every event that I'm using, and again, I would save on a lot of other things to have FR7s in there as full frame sensors. If we can't afford those, I'd go with probably FX30s. That's what I'm using right now. And have a couple of FX30s. It's just that you'll have a lot of lock-offs or someone operating a couple of them. But you'll find that an FX30 in the center and 2 FR7s on the wings means that you can zoom in and zoom out to everyone that you need to. And those full frame sensors are going to make everybody look great. And the Sony, if you don't have a lot of people to operate, the Sony autofocus is going to be your friend. So those are some things to think about. My other request is that you keep on asking questions. You just found us. You're building this thing as you design it. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at that. This is why we're here. What you're doing right now is why we're here every morning, is so that while you're working on this, take some of the stuff that we just looked at, figure out what part of that actually connects to your reality, and then keep on asking questions, and we'll keep on answering them, and hopefully we'll help you get it done. We're really excited. We can't wait to see the final product. Go ahead, Mickey.
Just to add to the whole construction side of things, I would recommend not doing the same mistake that many have done, wherein they build their control room in the same space as their actual studio where the talent is. Build a separate control room, isolate yourself and your noise away from your microphones.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have it, and if you can ask for another space or another office, even the hallway is better. We built ones where we had everything in rolling racks, and they sat in the studio. And when we shot, we just rolled the rolling racks were connected via a snake, and we would roll them out to the outside of it, shut the door, and do the event, and then roll them back in again, because we couldn't get a control room. But you don't want all those fans. And more importantly, you don't want your talking to bleed into it. You want to be able to talk. You want to be able to call cameras, talk to people, talk back. If you're in the same room, you can't do that anymore. So it's a really good point that Nikki brings up. And again, with all of these things, start to look at how do you control them IP. When you put lights in, make sure that they're DMX, because you can put that on ArtNet. And then once you put that on ArtNet, you can control all the lights remotely. And so think about how every piece of hardware that you put in can be controlled via IP. Now go ahead, Jeff.
So it's no coincidence that this is audio day, and we spent a good amount of time talking about audio for this situation, because audio is going to be really important. So definitely take heed of that. What Alex said about coming back, I did the same kind of thing in the summer of 2020. I came here, that's how I got involved in this, and asked so many questions, and then came back with more questions and more questions when designing systems. I don't know if that $50,000 is locked in, but something I'd recommend is to create proposals that are at several different levels, sort of a bare minimum, a decent, and a stretch goal, and kind of push for the stretch goal, and make sure you set your middle number higher than 50,000. Set your minimum at 50,000, and put your next one up at 75 or 90, and put your stretch goal at 150, because they're always going to want to nix something. But if they nix the top one, you've already landed at 75 or 90, so you've you've already stretched where you are. I don't know if you're past that situation. Check the chat here. Guy had a bunch of great comments. We kind of need to know, like, how many cameras are you planning? Is this going to be live streamed? Does this need to be captured to be edited? How are you going to handle that workflow? As Alex said, the ATEM extremes, make sure you get the ISO so that you can capture all of your cameras individually, already synced together. It makes it really easy to do a resolve re-edit of your live cut. So come back day after day. Think about joining the panel to ask some of these questions, because then we can have a dialogue with you right in live time, which is not only great for you, but for everyone who is part of our producers. Thanks so much.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Mark Sanderson in Chesterfield in the UK. Living in a PAL region, my cameras shoot at 25-50 frames per second. Is this a problem when streaming to a platform that wants 30/60 frames per second? That's the second of our QR code questions this morning.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, most cameras these days are switchable between PAL frame rates and NTSC frame rates, so you could easily switch to, say, 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second if that's the look that you're trying to go for. And also, of course, because these are the frame rates that most of these public streaming platforms work best with. Being in a 50 hertz country, you may encounter flickering if you're using any house lights. So turn off any house lights that's turned on in your shooting space, and then use production grade film equipment, film lighting or TV lighting, wherein those fixtures are flicker-free fixtures, so you will not see any flickering in your camera image capture.
Yeah, and it is really important to underline that almost every platform is streaming at 30 or 60. They're not streaming at 25 or 50 or 24. I think we need to keep reminding people that, because we keep on getting requests for doing 24-frame streams to YouTube or Facebook, and we're like, well, it's always going to be 30. And they're like, no, I heard it was going to be. It's not. It's 30. It's 30 or 60. Those are your two options. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What's the best bang for the buck in a memory card for a Sony ZV-E10 and a surrounding kit to do two shows, one a NIA exercise show and the other an Austin Tech News show with a 98-inch TCL TV for an LED backdrop?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Don't worry if you're just shooting on these video cards, or if you're running them out into a separate recorder or through a switcher of some sort, especially for the news show. You probably want to be doing that. SanDisk Extreme Pro is a good card. I would get a 128 or 256 gig card for that Sony. It would fit. It's been recommended for those. You can get them buy it from a reputable place, though, because there's lots of counterfeit SanDisk cards out there. So be very careful. Don't cheap out and buy them on eBay, where they'll say they're 500 gigs and you'll get them and they're only 32 gigs. So they're mislabeled and they're counterfeit. Buy them from B&H or some reputable seller that will not have the counterfeit cards. As far as the rest of the kit, you should have you can get any kind of tripod probably that supports the camera. A cheap, $50 tripod will work fine probably for the news show, because it's probably going to be a lock-off. For the exercise show, I'd get a fluid head. Some of the Manfrotto mid-level heads are pretty good that have pretty fluid, and you might want to have a camera operator to operate that on a exercise show, because you might want to get high or get low, and to demonstrate different exercises, you want to change your framing up quite a bit. And get lenses. I'd get zoom lenses on both. It'll make it easier on doing the setup. You're not talking about super high quality field lenses. You got plenty of light to deal with, so a short zoom, like a 15 to 45 or something like that, would work fine in a fairly small studio for you. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and we'll want to stay focused as we move forward on the memory card question. So go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to say I looked up. So I said, what memory card for ZV-E10? There's all sorts of things, but just be careful of this. I looked at this. This was the results coming out of Google. And that first card at $649 for a 128 gigabyte card, do not buy that. Okay, because the one for $39.95 next to it is probably a better deal. I'm just saying.
You go, Mickey.
Yeah, every manufacturer of hardware recording devices puts out, well, nearly all, they put out a either an approved or recommended media list, and I would generally stick to that. Of course, Sony would recommend their own Sony cards. That would be natural because they're Sony. But even if you have to pay a slight premium on these cards, it's still going to end up much cheaper than losing a full day of production material. So I would just stick with what the manufacturer recommends.
Yeah, and I have to say that I've had so many problems with SanDisk memory over the last 10 years that I would not buy any more of their products. Between their SSDs and their SD cards and everything else, we've had just an enormous number of issues with them. so I probably would stay away from SanDisk. I have a lot of their stuff, or I had a lot of their stuff. And we've leaned more into Samsung for most of the memory cards that we use now. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jeffrey Reyes in the Bronx, New York. Yesterday on Macbreak Weekly, Jason Snell recommended a green screen he uses that attaches to the back of his chair. What are the panel's thoughts on a product like this? And he's got an Amazon link to it.
Go, Jeffrey.
So what this product is called the Web Around. I had one back in 2010, and what it is a big circle. It does the taco fold type thing to fold down into something that you can put into a closet, and then of course it attaches to the back of the chair. The problem is it's a nice non-reflective area that you can use for privacy when you're in like a booth or cubicle or something like that. And like I said, it closes down nicely. But the biggest problem is it attaches to the chair, and it's right here behind your head. So if you do any type of lighting, that backsplash is going to hit your head, and of course it's going to be green. You're getting a bunch of distortion on this. But the bigger problem is a lot of people, they don't just sit still. They move around. And when you've got a camera with a green screen that's going back and forth and doing the little car wavy guy type thing, because that top is going to flap up and down, that's going to create even more distortion. So you got to be completely still, maybe even have the camera attached to the chair. So if you do move, the camera moves with you. And of course, if you try to get in and out of the chair during things, that's going to be even harder to do in some situations, because you're definitely going to move your chair to get out and then back in. So I would highly recommend, you can use the Web Around without attaching it to the chair. You'd put it on a stand behind you, but you want to get some distance behind, and then of course it's a circle about yay big, so that circle gets smaller when it goes farther back, and then you'll have to figure out something for a green screen. So I'd use something more rectangular that would set a little bit farther behind you, especially if it's dedicated in a studio area.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Jeffrey covered all the high points. My criticisms of it would be, A, it's going to block any backlight if you do have any backlight. It's right up next to your chair. So if you're lighting with any kind of hard lighting, or if you're outdoor in sunlight, you're going to see contact shadows between you and the green screen, because it's only about 6 inches behind your head. And there's really no way to eliminate those without softening up your soft light. And of course, like you say, if it's attached to your chair and it's a rotating chair, you're going to run into things with it. So it could be a problem.
Yeah, I found that if you actually watched the show yesterday, I think the challenge was you could see some of the edges. It's circular, not rectangular at the bottom. And I think that produced some particular, you could see the corners at times of what he was doing there. Also, it requires, when you're right up against it and you have a lot of wrinkles and shadows, you end up having to turn that key up a lot. And so I don't know if it was noticeable on the stream. It was definitely noticeable to me that there was a pretty hard edge around him, because he had to turn that key up a lot to get rid of everything that was behind him. So it's not, I think it works great for Jason while he's traveling. It's relatively simple to turn it on and get a reasonably good key. It's probably not something that I would use in a production. Next question.
Timothy Turner comes in next from Eagle, Wisconsin, and his question is, for OBS, is there a way to see LUFS?
Go ahead, Mickey.
So you can apply a filter directly on your inputs. A filter may include a VST plugin directly on the inputs going into OBS, but there's I don't know of a native way to be able to monitor the full program mix that you're broadcasting out within OBS. So what I would recommend for that is go into your OBS audio settings and set your monitoring device to either a virtual device or an actual hardware audio interface that feeds either a hardware audio meter or a loudness meter or a something that could host a software meter.
Next question.
TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Up here next, what's a quality audio interface that will work well with both a PC and Mac that has built-in noise reduction and costs less than a MixPre-3 II, needs to support XLR input? Does such a product exist?
Mickey?
So if we take a look here, a MixPre-3 is $950 US, and I believe the noise assist plugin is I think $300 or $400 US for a single instance of noise assist.
I think it's 300.
So what I would, $300 US for a single instance of noise assist. The Apollo Solo, if we take a look here, is $500 US dollars, while and the C-Suite CVox plugin from Universal Audio, which was developed in conjunction with Cedar Audio, is currently on sale at $176 US dollars. So that gives us a total of $675 US for the Apollo Solo, which is this guy, which includes 2 XLR inputs and the C-Suite CVox plugin, which you can apply multiple instances of within their console application.
Yeah, also, a lot of folks are starting to incorporate these in. One thing I'd love to do is do a head-to-head with the Shure. Remember, we had Shure on the show. The Shure MV7 Plus has the noise reduction built into it. So noise reduction, obviously, people realize this is a big deal. And for us, for a while, it was a bit of a lock of we would get you at MixPre-3s because they had that. And now it's more and more proliferation. The other thing that I would recommend people testing, not necessarily as a replacement for this, is the Zoom's personal audio, settings, that you can do. Personal noise reduction are very powerful. The reason that you want to have it in hardware or in the microphone or something else is so that it doesn't just work in Zoom, it works everywhere. And that everybody, that no matter where you go and no matter, Teams and many other things you end up with, you can do solid noise reduction. You're not using their less than, but I will say that we're finding that the Zoom stuff is getting closer and closer to a lot of these other solutions that are out there. But I would say that also look at I'm hoping to do a head-to-head sometime soon with the MV7 Plus and the MixPre, but I'd love to incorporate Universal Audio as well. Yeah, go Bill.
Well, if you want to hear what Mickey's suggestion sounds like, I'm speaking to it through it right this moment. I am sitting here with a microphone going through a Universal Audio Apollo Solo. The C-Suite plugin is active and it's taking care of my room noise, and this is what it sounds like.
There you go. Next question.
Chris Sabato at Albany, Oregon is up next. Are there drawbacks to short shotguns? I'm using a Rode NTG2 atop an ENG camera, and I'd like to switch to a shorter shotgun mic. Any suggestions?
Jeff?
The first question I would have is, are you shooting indoors or outdoors? People tend to think that a long shotgun is going to be more directional than a short shotgun, but generally what the big difference is the frequencies at which it acts as a shotgun. And a longer shotgun works to lower and lower frequencies because it's all about size with audio, and longer wavelengths need a longer shotgun. If you want something shorter, I would probably recommend, especially if you're shooting primarily indoors, is just go to a very good quality hypercardioid microphone. Sennheiser MKH50 is a personal favorite, but there are other options as well, and I'm sure Mickey's got a lot of great things to say about this one.
Good, Mickey?
Yeah, generally speaking, with a shorter shotgun microphone, there are less frequencies that the interference tube design can cancel out. But if you're just looking for a top mic on a camera to give you nat sound or as a backup to your actual audio, ENG audio rig, well, you didn't mention budget, so a lot of people like the mini CMIT from Sheps for that. Well, for all around sound, but I do know some people that use mini CMITs as top mics. But for us, I think about 5 years ago, we standardized on the Deity S-Mic 2S. This is the shotgun microphone from Deity Microphones. They're not too expensive, and we've for E&G shoots, for reality TV, for documentaries, we've standardized on this. If the productions are unable to afford more expensive microphones to rent out, like the 416s or MKH60s.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, have you ever seen UniFi gateways not detect AV equipment connected to them for remote control, not for audio voice over IP? My UniFi Express does not detect my Yamaha DM3 despite having a valid ARP table entry and a DHCP lease.
Good, Mickey.
I have certainly seen the clients list within the UniFi dashboard be a little delayed in updating its list. This is especially true if the gateway has been restarted after a lease has been handed over to a device. So if a device does not ask for a lease after the gateway, or I guess they call it the console, has restarted, it does not immediately show up in the clients list, but it is there in the ARP table.
Next question.
David Brady in New York City says, are there any diagnostic tools to test throughput on the USB bus of a MacBook Air M2? I'm trying to play out through a Sonnet SE1 / Blackmagic Design Decklink Duo, and the test file degrades over time, breaking up. Seems like a buffer issue.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There are several different options. You can go the cheap route and get an Amazon. I think it's $109 for, they call it the Power Z USB fast charging, but I don't know if they're going to do Thunderbolt. There is a dedicated Thunderbolt one from gsdx.us. And there's several in between. You just basically plug it into the Thunderbolt port. You can't, if you're looking for something that's going to do throughput to the Sonnet box, that probably won't work through there, but a lot of Sonnet boxes usually have a Thunderbolt in, Thunderbolt out. You could definitely plug it into the Thunderbolt out and then test it that way and see where you're at the port, and then, of course, when you plug it in, where you're at once it's gone through.
And I actually don't believe that Sonnet box works with a USB connection. You need a Thunderbolt connection. So I think that you need to, I would get a Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4 cable. So I don't know. I don't even think it should show up. So if you connect it with a USB cable. So unless you weren't being precise there and that's what you're using, but make sure that you're using a Thunderbolt. That is a Thunderbolt piece of hardware, and it needs a Thunderbolt connection. And if it's working at all, it's kind of amazing that it even mounted. So you Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4. Next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto comes up next. When presenting keynotes from different computers, how do you manage fonts? Is there a way to embed fonts in a slide deck?
I hadn't really thought about that. I realize I have a tendency to copy. I do it in multiple computers, and I move those around. But I have a tendency to copy my fonts around between my font books pretty often to make sure that they're all on the same computers. For other reasons, and I realize that Keynote just happens to benefit from that. So I'm not sure if Keynote. I haven't run into that specifically in that problem. I will say that it is a good practice when you add fonts. If I know that I've added a bunch of fonts, I have a tendency to save them out and copy them over to other computers that I may be using, because I want to make sure that they're there on all of them. Another thing to think about is really I didn't get a lot of Google fonts for a long time because there was like 8 of them and they were horrible and everybody used them and they were goofy. There's like 1,500 now. They must have a whole division that just copies other people's fonts, because they're all like a little different than some other font that they were supposed to be like, but they just keep building. They have a foundry that they just keep on building all these fonts. And the advantage of using Google Fonts is that you can grab a bunch of them, put them on all your computers. They're free. They're unlicensed. You can do whatever you want with them. And when you send them to somebody else, they don't have to go out and buy fonts. And as someone who has to buy fonts probably every couple of weeks because I have a client that has a different font than what we were using before, I really respect when I get Google fonts. So like, and I used to make fun of it. I'd be like, oh, if I have to use monospace one more time, or if I have to use, there's certain Google fonts that you'd see a lot. And it's gotten a lot better. So I would definitely, and by the way, you can go to ChatGPT and say, I'm looking for fonts I'm looking for a Google font that's like this font, or I'm looking for a Google font that has this feel to it. Give me 10 of those, and ChatGPT will just hand you, these are the 10 fonts you may want to look for, because otherwise it's like a needle in a haystack. So ChatGPT is great for finding the fonts that you need inside of the Google thing, but there's like 1,500 of them now. Go ahead, Bill.
99.9% of the time, I am fine with somebody else's version of the same font. But since I work with art directors occasionally, I will tell you, I have had them walk up to me and go, where are the elongated descenders on the cap T? Did you switch fonts on me? They were looking at that level of precision, and they had decided to make an artistic choice, and it drives me crazy.
I don't try to replace them. I'm just saying that we generally, if someone gives me a font, if I download a font, the way I check it is I make it the same size and I put it right over top of something that they've flattened, and I make sure that it's exactly the same. And to your point, all those little descenders and all the curves and how the A goes and how the S looks and all those things feel different. Also, the advantage that you get from a better foundry is better kerning. So it's not just the shape of the letters, but it's the spacing and all those things that have been hinted from the font. So there's a lot of pairs that get built within those systems as well. The other thing you see companies do, and you always want to, and Craig, I don't know if you're working with a company that would do this, but a lot of companies build their own fonts, and the reason they do that is so they don't have to buy any more fonts. So they take a font, they say, we like these 3 fonts, and they hand them to a foundry, and they pay them $5,000, $10,000 to build one. But now that's much cheaper than licensing those fonts to everybody in the building, and so that's another thought that people should always keep in mind if you're working for a large company is make your own font. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia is up next. I'm looking to move from the ATEM Mini Pro to the ATEM Mini Extreme and put on the Blackmagic website. It's no longer showing the Extreme; it is showing the ISO. Should I consider the ISO?
There you go, Jeff.
From what I could see on vendors, the ATEM Mini Extreme without ISO recording is still available. It's $300 extra, somewhere around that neighborhood. And I would say you definitely should go for getting the ISO. It is functionality that you will need at some point down the road. If you end up using your Extreme, capturing all of the video sources and audio sources as individual isolated records is a great thing. Even if you're doing that in your cameras, having that create the DaVinci Resolve file that has your live cuts as edits already set up in the project is wonderfully great for doing a live cut and then going back in and fixing a few errors and then creating a new exported output, which is actually at higher resolution than just capturing the output because the ISO files are much higher resolution than the program file.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Should
I just want to
caveat.
add. So go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, I wanted to caveat that thing about the program file. The program file depends on your. There are separate settings for the program file, so there is the capability to record it at the highest resolution, but not if you're streaming using the ATEM Mini's built-in streamer, because then the encode for the stream is the encode for the program. But the ISOs are always recorded at the higher bit rate.
Go ahead, Courtney.
They are still H.264 files. And yes, even on the Blackmagic site, you have to scroll down to the very bottom to see all of them, because they've got a page up top that misleads you. It says 2 ISO type switchers, and it just shows the Mini Pro ISO and the Extreme Pro ISO, but they still sell it. It's right there. And then there's the Pro ISO right there. So, yeah, it's still available. And, if you're doing live streaming, the ISO may not be as important to you if you're never going to post editing this stuff together. If you're, the regular Extreme would be a little bit $300 cheaper. I'm not sure, Alex, you may know this because you have a lot of the extremes. Does it have an additional USB port on the difference between the extreme and the extreme ISO for doing the recording?
I don't think so. I think that the ISO, the only thing it does is has the additional pieces there. I don't think it has. I think they both have two USB connections, and the one of the big advantages of the SDI version, which I don't think Tony needs, is that it has 4 outputs, which is super useful. Instead of 2 HDMI outputs. So that's the big value. But I think that the ISO and the Extreme are very similar, except for the fact that the ISO can record. I don't think that there's a difference in the number of USB outputs. Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. Short notice question for Jeff Francis and the team in general. The new Arturia Polybrute 12 is making waves. Thoughts?
Go ahead, Jeff.
First thought, I'm not a synth person, but boy, this looks really cool. It's not out yet, but it is available for pre-order. There's the Polybrute. It's an analog synth, but one of the things I like about it, if I scroll down here somewhere, I saw it does have DAW integration. So I think the capability of having your analog synth incorporated into your DAW as you're composing, writing. So it's got a lot of functionality as an analog synth. You can certainly dive deep into it, but I think you could also just call up presets that other people have created. List price looks to be $4,000. But again, it's a pre-order, so I don't know anybody's played with it yet. So we'll see.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and his question this time is, Jeff, I like the concept of bare minimum, decent, and stretch goals. When presenting project plans to management, have you ever prioritized needs in terms of short, medium, and long term?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I work for a university, and one of the things I've discovered is that oftentimes aiming for the long term is difficult because of the knowledge that money may dry up or disappear or go elsewhere. So the developing the stretch goal idea was to try to get as much as we could at that moment, which was during the beginnings of COVID, building in streaming systems. I didn't give them those names in the actual proposal. I think the stretch goal was to go for the higher level 4K 1-inch sensor Canon PTZs, which I did not get. Panasonic. The UA150s had to drop down to the third-inch sensor, which was still decent in our smaller rooms. I could definitely use improvements in our larger spaces, but have not yet convinced management to spend the money on that yet. I think what will happen is when the next venue comes online, it may be that we convince them to put the good cameras in the big venue and then move those cameras that are currently there into the new venue. But that's a question.
Yeah, it's always hard. A lot of times what we try to do is get people to see what the difference is. It's hard to explain to them that this camera might be better than that camera. And so oftentimes, I have the advantage that when I'm doing a show, I'm renting the cameras. And so we just rent the cameras that we think would be what they want to see. And once they get used to how it looks, it's very hard to go back. So we had a client that was very used to 2/3 inch chips, professional cameras. We got them really used to full frame sensors, and it's really hard for them to go. When the 2/3 inch chips show up now, people go, "What happened? Like, what happened to the show? Like, it was someone threw it off the cliff," and we're like, "I just went back to broadcast cameras." Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, but I think that definitely the technique I had here of using the 3 levels, had I not done the 3 levels, I would have gotten the minimum, because they were looking at that time to spend as little money as possible just to get into actually crossing the checkbox of we can't have an audience, so we have to stream, and having the minimum, having the ideal stretch goal of UA150s that they could nix. And I fully knew, there was about a 1% chance of me actually getting that proposal funded. But the fact that they had that to nix meant that it was very easy for them to look at the next price line down and go, well, that's a whole lot cheaper. We can do that, even though it was more than they wanted.
Right. Next question.
Peter Rosado in Las Vegas is up next with this one. Blackmagic iOS camera is amazing and free. The panel's thoughts on the KinoPro Video App. It's $19.99 US, and he's got a link there to it.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing thing. We're going to see a lot of these apps coming out very soon, and of course, one of the rumors at WWDC is that Apple's going to be updating the iOS camera app for cinematic use here. I think the biggest advantage on this one, you're basically going to pay for a whole bunch of LUTs that get added to the app, so you don't have to create your own LUTs, and you don't have to think about that. You can just swipe onto something like a Kodak 79 or anything like that. The whole point is that it'll probably be a little bit easier. $19.99. It's really hard to swallow that price tag when you've got apps that are doing it for free now.
Yeah, I think that's going to be I don't think there'll be very many apps out there. I think that we're not going to see a lot of proliferation, and I think that the reason for that is specifically because it is I think one of the problems that people are going to have is that there are so many good apps out there. The Blackmagic one really cleared a lot of the space. Keynote is clearing the other part of the space. So, and then Apple has its own camera. So I think that there may be one or two other ones, but I think you won't find very many video cameras on the phone because the players that jumped in are so good at what they do. So the Keynote is made by the creators of Halide. And so these are folks that really understand how to take advantage of it. And I do think that what distinguishes them is the ability to add those LUTs so easily, as Jeffrey said. So adding the LUTs is really the thing that distinguishes them. A simpler interface, a little less confusing interface, but a less technical interface than what the Blackmagic provides. So you have not very technical, which is the Apple phone. And I have to admit, when I need to take something of my kids or something else, I open up the iPhone, just the camera app, because there's less things I can screw up. I just want to take this video. I just want to capture it. But anytime I do anything that I'm going to use, I very quickly move to the Blackmagic camera. I bought the Keynote. It was $10 off last week. And someone mentioned it here, and I bought it while we were on the show. So I have that. I have that app, and I think it's a great app. I think the interface is very different. Again, being able to add the LUTs is going to be its distinguishing factor at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see what the battle is here. But I do think that market is not going to be a very good market for other people to be in. I think Shoot also from Square TV, Michael Forrest, who's on our show, has its own value to it because you can draw on it. It's a great USB camera. So that also fulfills one of the other things that are needed. But I don't think that the investment of Filmic Pro probably turned out super well for bending spoons because these are big players that are playing in this field now, and they're doing a subscription model that no one wants to do. Next question.
Peter Rosado is finished. Peter Moore now, Auckland, New Zealand. I have an AMD 5700 XT video card in my Ryzen PC, and I'm now on Linux Mint, GPU accelerated DaVinci Resolve, Unreal Engine, and so forth. Dumb question maybe, but if a card has 2 display ports and 2 HDMI ports, does that actually mean it supports 4 monitors?
Courtney, real quick.
Generally, I've found, yes, it does. Display ports will support higher resolutions than the HDMIs, but usually it will support 4 monitors on Windows.
Go ahead, Mickey.
And Linux, sorry.
Yeah, with the it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. There are multiple manufacturers that make this card. But if you're talking about the one that's directly from AMD, it looks like it does support the 4 display outputs directly, and also supports multi-stream transport, DisplayPort multi-stream transport, which gives you up to 6 1440p displays through daisy chaining out of that single card.
And one thing to take a look at is that a lot of these things in Unreal may or may not work as well with the AMD video cards compared to the NVIDIA cards. They chunk their data differently, and you may find that some of the performance is not as good on the AMD cards. AMD is really good for gaming. For some of these other bits and pieces, it may not perform as well as you'd like it to. So you may want to be thinking about a 4000 series NVIDIA card in addition to what you have now. We have coming up, of course, we're going to talk about ATEM and audio and mixing and so on and so forth. The rest of the week is pretty exciting. We've got tomorrow, Ecamm is coming on. So we have Katie Fox and Andy Carluccio from Zoom. And Doc Rock, is going to be joining us, and they're going to be talking about the new Zoom integration with Ecamm. A lot of people are really excited about it, actually. So I think that it's going to be a really good second hour and place where you can get your questions answered. And so definitely should be a good second hour. Get those questions in early. I think we only have Andy for the first half an hour, so get the questions in early tomorrow, and we'll move forward with that. Also, we have Imre Halevi talking about Ivy League sports. He is the associate director of athletics at Harvard University, and he's going to be talking about how they approach sports. So that's going to be a pretty interesting conversation as well. Of course, we have Q&A on Saturday, introspection on Sunday. That Sunday's a good day to ask questions about what we're doing here, why we're doing it, philosophical questions. You can ask technical ones as well. And also a quick reminder that we have the panelist meeting. If you're a panelist or interested in being a panelist, we have the panelist meeting Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.